Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please find your way into the waterside room. Please take a moment to silence your mobile phones and devices.
by 1C. 1C, go.
Please take your seats. The program will begin momentarily.
And sun cameras go. And VOG. Let's go to the whole slide. VOG 2, go.
Please welcome Step Africa.
Good morning, CityLab, DC. Did you all have a good time this morning? Thank you so much for having us. Again, we are Step Africa, and we are so glad to be here. Now, before we get out of here, we like to play this little game, and I need everyone's help. So clap your hands. Now listen to the rules. They're real easy. Just follow me. Hey, when I say okay, you say all right. When I say all right, you say okay, okay. All right. Okay, okay. All right, all right. Okay, all right, all right, okay, all right, okay, all right. Okay. ASA, break it down.
Let's give one more round of applause for Step Africa. Please welcome the Mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, and the Chief Executive Officer of Bloomberg Philanthropies, Patricia Harris.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Washington, D.C.
And welcome to CityLab 2019. Wasn't that fantastic?
It's amazing. It was indeed amazing, and I have been very lucky to see Step Africa perform many, many times, and they never disappoint. Executive Director C. Brian Williams has really built something special right here in Washington, D.C.
And we're very proud that the dance company is part of the Bloomberg Philanthropies Arts Innovation and Management Program.
Let's give them another big round of applause. So, Patty, we know there have been two big things people have been talking about in D.C. all weekend: the Washington Nationals and CityLab.
As a lifelong Mets fan, trust me, I was only talking about CityLab.
So we know, though, that there's one thing that we can agree on, and that is how exciting it is to be hosting CityLab right here in my hometown in our nation's capital. So on behalf of all 700,000 of us, men, women, and children who all call D.C. home, I want to say welcome to Washington, D.C. Now, I'm biased, of course, as every mayor in this room is, but I can't think of a better place to host this gathering of like-minded folks than in the nation's capital, where we are a city, county, state, and school district all at once. And that's a lot of policy and innovation happening in one place. So we all know as well that any one of us in city government, that we are uniquely positioned to make a big difference in people's day-to-day lives.
I couldn't have said that better myself, Mayor. The goal of CityLab is to find new solutions to the most pressing problems cities are facing today. And this year, we're also asking an additional question: who has the power to change cities? At Bloomberg Philanthropies, we believe change can come from the ground up. And that's why so much of our work is about empowering cities by working with mayors and their teams to help them think outside the box, take risks, collaborate with the private sector, use data to their advantage, and engage more directly with their citizens. Sometimes that means helping cities take big swings, like working with them to modernize their digital infrastructure, which opens new ways to deliver essential services. And sometimes it means focusing on projects that will uplift communities and make the city a more vibrant place to live. One example of the latter is our new Asphalt Art Initiative, which will provide cities with funding and how-to guidance to transform streets and public spaces with local art. So to answer the question of the hour, we believe that everyone has the power to change cities, from mayors and chief technology officers to dance companies and local artists.
And that's right. In fact, here's something you might not know. Just last week, DC became one of the first cities in the nation to set area-specific targets for affordable housing. And I know, it's a big one for us. And I know if we're going to reach those goals, and we will reach those goals, then we're going to need everyone in our community to engage. So as a graduate of the very first Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, I wholly endorse the Bloomberg approach.
You're just saying that because you know that Mike Bloomberg is sitting in the audience, aren't you?
Perhaps, but I also mean it. And I know that there are a lot of people in the room who would agree with me, even those who haven't yet worked with one of the Bloomberg teams. What I love about CityLab, and I've had the chance to go to a few now, is that it brings hundreds of people together across all sectors: government, business, philanthropy, media, the arts, and academia. We come from 163 cities and 30 different countries, and we each bring our own distinct and unique perspective and ideas. But we have one important thing in common. Everyone here is open-minded, ready to learn, and willing to do whatever it takes to give more people a fair shot in our great cities and in our great nation.
And that is why CityLab is so special and why Bloomberg is grateful to be involved along with our partners, the Aspen Institute and the Atlantic. Thank you again for having us here this week, Mayor Bowser.
It's my pleasure. You're very welcome. And now I know that we are all ready to get started. To kick off CityLab 2019, here is the moderator of CBS's Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan.
And the founder of Bloomberg LP, the 108th mayor of New York City, the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action, and the guy I'm proud to call boss, not just because he's sitting in the audience, Mike Bloomberg.
Hello. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning to you, and good morning to so many of you. I got the wonderful chance to meet some of these mayors along with you last
They're
evening.
the ones that make the difference. Cities are where the action is, and these are the people that lead them.
Well, I'm excited to get a chance to go through a number of topics with you, Mr. Mayor, in this little, is this what your living room looks like?
Not really, but
Plus or minus a few extra guests. Well, I want to talk about why you think that building the ground up is the way to actually affect change. And this is, of course, the swamp, the place that so many people here in Washington have sort of given up on being able to work the system. But let's get to the sort of overarching theme here, which if you look at data from the UN, they say that by 2050, 2/3 of the global population are going to be moving into cities, that the population is actually shifting. Maybe that backs up your theory.
Yep.
But what does that actually do to how government has to adapt to function? Are we reverting to these like Medici-like city-states?
well, it's not an accident that most state capitals are located far away from the most populous areas in their states. It is because the state government sort of generally acts independently of the federal government and of the local governments and of the people. And that's why they really don't accomplish a heck of a lot. And the federal government is even more in a cocoon. But mayors are there on the streets. When they walk out, you can walk up to the mayor and say, hey, I need something done. The traffic light is broken, or my kid's not getting an education, or my neighborhood's falling apart. And mayors can't walk away. They've got to give you an answer. And the local press knows the mayor's home phone number, and they can get to them. And so there's a demand for services that the public can understand knows how to ask for and knows how to hold the leaders responsible, and those leaders are the mayors. All the monies may come down from the top where you have the most pricing power, the most taxing power, but they are distributed at the local level generally. And so mayors are where the solutions are. A bad mayor can take a city in the wrong direction and sometimes very hard to recover. A good mayor can make a difference. And I watched yesterday driving around here in Washington. I think you see neighborhoods here that were blighted for an awful long time, and now there are people on the streets, and they've painted their houses, and there's no trash, and they've planted some bushes, and people have smiles on their faces when they're walking down the street. And so this is a city that's turned around. Washington used to be someplace you didn't want to live. You wanted to live in Chevy Chase. Now you can actually live in downtown Washington and raise your family there and have a great life. And that just shows you that really does come just from the mayor. The city council is important and the public is important, but every organization is led by somebody, and the person that leads it, whether it's the president, governor, mayor, whether it's the head of your company or your place of worship or your hospital, your school, or even your family, there's one person that sets the work ethic, sets the ethic for honesty and everything else. And if they're good, everything works, and if they're bad, it's a disaster.
But isn't that also fundamentally driven by the amount of resources available to the executive running the city? I mean, you look at some of the data that was out today from National League of Cities. There's a prediction that 2/3 of finance offices in cities around the country are predicting a recession. The Midwest in particular is looking at softness.
Well,
doesn't it make it harder?
It is harder, and the taxing power of the federal government is much greater than that of the states and greater than the cities. But in the end, the federal government, with all their taxes, how does that money get distributed? It's got to get down to the local level where you write a check, hand somebody some money, ask them to do something, make sure you sign the contract, and if the contract is fulfilled. So for all of this, yes, you're going to feel it at the city level where people get laid off, but you get laid off, we've got to find you housing. We've got to give you services, make sure you can put food on the table for your family. Those are local things.
What do you think about the accountability question there? I mean, there's been a lot of attention paid to, in my industry, the restrictions or the lesser shrinking footprint of local news coverage by major corporations who are not investing in it in the way they used to.
That's correct.
Does that hurt?
But that's not happening in government.
But you don't think that hurts, that you'd have fewer people holding City Hall to account, that is going to change?
You do, and I don't know that I think that's healthy. I think these aggregators, one of the problems with social media is you have so much news, you don't know what's important, and we are deciding what you see by crowdsourcing, letting a computer do it, rather than an editor who makes the decision as to what you really should be reading every day and what you should be focusing on. And I don't think that that's healthy, and I think we are suffering because of that. But nevertheless, there are community newspapers that still survive. You can get to the mayor, though, in the ways you can't get to any other elected official. The president is so far away. Congress people and senators are so far away. Even governors and state legislatures are far away. Not true with your local city council and your local mayor. There, you literally see them on the streets. You can walk up and say, hey, I need some services. You're not giving it to me. And if you don't, I'm going to vote for your opponent.
You know, one of the themes that came up in some conversations I had last night with some of the mayors was outside investment dollars or countries coming in. I know you think a fair amount about China. In this city, one of the few things that gets bipartisan support right now is fear of China and figuring out how to stand up to increase surveillance, or their investment dollars somehow changing the complexion or changing social norms. If you're a local mayor, how do you look at that? Do you say, I don't want Chinese firms coming into my area?
Look,
do you turn away?
The number of Chinese firms that are here that invest locally or employ people locally is de minimis. Well, we have some big problems with China. We have this asymmetrical relationship. In fact, Trump has focused in on something that the most people in America think is right. They've thought we should take on China because it's so big and it's so productive and they're making so much progress. It threatens our domination of the world, our domination of so many industries. Things are changing and we're gonna have to adapt to that because you're not gonna stop them from keep growing. They've got 1.3 billion people. They've just taken 200 or 300 million people out of poverty. It's something that's never been done before. It's a power to be reckoned with.
But
Nevertheless,
investment in
not at the local
infrastructure
level.
and
How many
Huawei
Chinese
and-
firms locally?
But investment in infrastructure. This is a huge foreign policy push by the
They
administration.
are doing that, and they're
to
right.
push back on it.
No, China is investing in infrastructure and natural resources, lots of things around the world, building relationships, which America should be doing. We're not doing it, but they're not doing it here in America. I'd be hard-pressed to find many Chinese companies that own assets here in America.
Well, there were some debates over local networking issues in places in the South, but not on the large scale like you're talking about in Africa or other places. One of the other issues I know you spend a lot of time thinking about is climate change and working on. I saw you out in Iowa a few months ago on the Gun Sense Forum. But while we were out there, talking to some of our reporters, they said, you hear from farmers here things like remarking on weather patterns changing, remarking on how it impacts their business. But that phrase itself of climate change has become so associated with partisan politics that people are reluctant to even use it. And reluctant to accept
It's funny,
it. Do you think it's a messaging problem?
I would argue it's gone in the other direction. It used to be that climate change didn't exist. Then it became a communist plot. Then it became true but not man-made. And today, we've got to do something about it. And the farmers you talk to, I talked to as well, and their big bitch was that Canada had warmed up so much, they were now growing the same crops in Canada that had been growing in Iowa. And all of a sudden, they had competition, which they didn't like. But nobody is denying, or other than a handful of really crazy people, nobody's denying the fact that climate change is taking place. I don't mean to be cavalier about it, but turn on your television. Look at the fires in California. Look at the floods. 4 feet of rain in Texas in one day. I mean, just look at, you can see that water coming out of the glaciers in Greenland. Every place is seeing it. You cannot walk away. No rational person can say something isn't changing. You can say, well, the scientists said it was in 2050, and I think it's 2040, and maybe it's going to happen more here, and oh, it was just cold in California, but warm in New York. There's always minor things. The general trend is inescapable.
But
something is really happening. And
is there a mishandling of you're describing a problem set that you say people are recognizing.
Yes.
But I'm talking about the political allergy to using something that has become associated with a singular political party at this point. How do you flip
Even
that?
the Republicans have stopped saying generally, there's a handful of them, but there's probably a handful of Democrats too that just defy logic. But basically, everybody understands something is happening and we have to do something about it.
I think you have names in your mind you're saying.
No, it doesn't matter.
You
Look,
don't want to say.
you go into your company and you're the boss and you say to the board of directors, I don't believe in this stuff. I'm not going to worry about our plant getting flooded out. They're going to say, wait a second. You didn't build a berm, you didn't move the plant, you didn't have a backup place, you didn't have a plan, you didn't get insurance and all this other stuff. You're fired. You get fired instantly. Nobody no corporate executive behaves that way. They all take it seriously, or they would not survive. And people are starting to do it with their own homes. But if you take a look, we are making progress, at least in America, in trying to reduce our carbon footprint. Federal government, no. Trump's not doing anything other than helping raise money for climate change. When he says something bad about this, money comes flooding in. I wish he'd say some more bad things about guns. Money keeps coming in. That's what like Hillary was a fundraiser for the Republican Party. Trump's a fundraiser for these causes. Okay, but it is These things, people are doing something at home. People are turning off their air conditioners before they go out in the morning because their electric bill's so high. They're painting their roofs white because it'll reflect off heat and their electric bill goes down. They're buying more fuel-efficient cars. They're going towards incandescent or LEDs rather than incandescent bulbs. Corporations, just take a look. Fly over an industrial area covered with solar panels, or painting their roofs white. Companies are getting enormous pressure from stockholders to be environmentally friendly, and they are responding. And you don't see it if you just, read a few stories in the newspaper, but just go out into the real world. This is where the progress is coming from. The private sector, individuals and companies, and in all fairness, some local governments, because mayors can influence how much fuel you burn in your building and the traffic patterns and those kinds of things. But as you go up the level, away from the local governments, they become more removed and really have less say. And so the fact that the president wants to drop out of COP21, I wish he wouldn't. Hopefully he'll change his mind, but it really doesn't matter. America has brought its carbon footprint down by, 18, 20%. And it's because we've closed 297 or whatever the number is out of 530 coal-fired power plants. And we have a good chance of closing them all before 2020.
I want to ask you about guns. You mentioned that quickly there. President Trump is headed to Chicago today, a city he's referred to as a war zone because of, in part, the high level of gun violence. How do you match that group of statistics against the fact that, according to the Giffords Law Center, Illinois has one of the strictest set of gun laws in the country? They rank at number 8.
It's easy. Look, we don't have borders between states, so you can go over to the next state, buy guns, and bring them in. People do that. It's interesting. In New York, we used to have, at 4th of July, a number of kids who lost an eye or lost a finger or something with fireworks going off. What do? We put cops in the parking lots in Pennsylvania where they sold fireworks to out-of-staters, but not to people who lived in Pennsylvania. It was too dangerous for people in Pennsylvania, so they wouldn't let them buy it. So they sold them to people out of state. We wrote down the license plate numbers, put them into the license plate reader, and when they came into New York City, we grabbed them, pulled them over, took their car away, put them in jail or whatever the hell we did with them, and stopped it. And now nobody goes to the hospital with losing an eye or a finger, at least as of 3 years ago, they didn't. I assume it's still going on. You can do these things, but the problem with guns is it's easy to buy them in one place, carry them over into another. That's why.
So you still fundamentally believe the issue is
if
about
you get those laws in
alone.
every state, you'd solve your problem.
But it's accessibility, period, for you, in terms of why you see this spike in Chicago itself.
Well, it's accessibility. It's also no background checks for even gun store sales, where you do have to legally have one. Sometimes they don't do a good job because the database isn't up to date and that sort of thing. So there's some other factors, but basically it is accessibility. And if you just had background checks across the country so that people with criminal records, psychiatric problems, or minors couldn't buy guns, you'd make an enormous difference. And the place you'd really make a difference is with suicide. In America this year, 12,000 people will get killed with illegal handguns. 19,000, mostly young people, will kill themselves with illegal handguns. If you could just delay them from getting a gun 24 hours, all the statistics show, because there are a lot of states that already have background checks, people say, oh, I can't get the gun, screw it, I'll go to the movies. I'll kill myself tomorrow. And the psychiatrists will tell you they don't go back. If you could just delay them 24 hours, you wouldn't stop all of them, but you would stop an enormous number of them.
But you still want greater access to mental health and other programs.
There's lots of problems. I can't tell you can solve everything. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And the fact of the matter is here, you'd really make a big difference.
Another New York City mayor has been making some headlines these days in this city and apparently back in Kyiv, Ukraine. I'm wondering, what do you think of what Rudy Giuliani is doing?
I made a commitment when I left office that I would not talk about my predecessor or my successor publicly or privately, and I will stick with that. But I will say, Rudy Giuliani, no. Come on, in all fairness, Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor, brought crime down, brought homeless down, and after that, I don't have any idea what he's doing.
Well, what he is doing is the focus of a lot of attention here in this city, because he is directly related to the impeachment inquiry that
Couldn't
you
hear
know.
your question, sorry.
He's directly related to the impeachment inquiry that is underway in Congress right now. It's all but certain, it appears at this point, that in the House, there will be a vote on impeachment. And then if it goes to the Senate, there will likely be a trial. But it is Republican controlled. To get a 2/3 majority to vote to remove the president seems a political hill to climb at this point. Do you see a purpose to this? And do you think this is resonating outside of Washington?
Well, that's your job to find out whether it's resonating.
I thought you were talking to all these mayors.
No, I just tell you, in my family, it is. I think I had sided with Nancy Pelosi saying I thought that an impeachment trial was so interfering with the democratic process, we should wait until the election, and then if the public didn't want Donald Trump again, they have a chance to express themselves. And so I was opposed to going ahead with impeachment. I think at this point, there's been so much information that's come out that leads one to think there's a reasonable chance that something that was wrong was done, and we should have an investigation and have a trial. And so I've switched my position on that. But
you support the inquiry.
at this point, I do. I do think he would, if he did get impeached, he certainly would not get convicted. But I do think that it's gone so far. There's so many real questions about inappropriate actions that the public deserves to have Congress do what it was put in place by the founding fathers to provide oversight. And if you remember back in 2018, I spent an enormous amount of money to try to, and I think we were successful. I think we had a big impact, switching the House from Republican to Democrat, not because of policies, but because the Republicans were not providing the oversight of the executive office that they should have been. And now I think we should hold the Democrats' feet to the fire and say they should provide the oversight.
What does that mean for you? I mean, are you going to, say, do what Tom Steyer does or has done, which is to buy money running?
Well, I don't know that you have to run ads to get the Democrats to vote for impeachment. I think they got the bit in their teeth and they're going there.
No, but you're not actively going to be, I mean, I haven't heard you talk about it before today.
I'm not a congressman or a congresswoman. That's up to them to do it. But I do think that we as citizens should hold the feet to the fire and say, that's the purpose of the legislative branch. Do your job.
I believe you told me that Mayor Pete once participated in some of your Bloomberg programs.
He was in the first class of mayors. We have a program to train mayors. We train 40 a year, and he was in the first class.
So does that, by extension, mean he has the Bloomberg seal of approval? Are you endorsing him?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think there are 6 of the candidates, I think it's 6, could be 4, that were mayors. And the one, I'm sure I took a picture with Mayor Pete back then, it was a long time ago, and I would have just shaken his hand. The one that I know very well is Cory Booker, because he was mayor of Newark City just across the river, and he endorsed me, and I endorsed him, and we campaigned for each other in a number of local elections.
But at this point, for the higher office both are seeking, are you going to endorse either of them?
At the moment, I'm staying out of it, and I'll look at it down the road. I will say what worries me is these jobs, president, governor, mayor, whatever, they're executive jobs. And we should be picking people with executive experience. And being in the legislature doesn't give you that. Being a real estate promoter doesn't give you that. It takes a long time to learn how to manage. And the President of the United States has to manage 4 million people. I manage 300,000 people. Now, nobody is ever going to have experience managing 4 million people before they get the job, but you should have some experience in a sizable organization of learning how you pull people together and get management in there and evaluate people and get them to work together and make sure that everybody is treated the way you'd like them to be treated. And we're not doing that. And I guess you could say Corey's got some management experience. If you're a governor, you have a little bit of management experience. But out of all the candidates, basically, they do not have that. And Mayor Pete, he was a mayor. He's got some management experience. It's a very small town, but nothing wrong with that. At least he can claim that he is a manager, as can Corey. Sanders was a mayor. A couple others were mayors as well. And that gives you some experience. But none of them have had the big experience of running something sizable for a long period of time. And that's when you earn your spurs, if you will.
What role are you going to play in the 2020 race?
Well, I'm going to vote.
Well, you played a pretty big role you were just describing in 2018 in terms of trying to support candidates.
We'll see. Down the road, it's a long ways away. The election's more than a year away. So I don't know that you have to rush into it. But, I'm interested, obviously, and care very much for this country, and I think we're going in the wrong direction on an awful lot of things. I will say that a lot of the campaign rhetoric that you hear, it's based on polling, which I find disgraceful. You should think people would have their own views and stick to them, whether it fits. And if you believe in something and it's not good for your reelection, you have two choices. You can either be an honest person and say, well, this is who I am, whether you like it or not. If you don't like it, don't vote for me. Or you can say, oh, I just changed my mind and I'm going to go in your direction.
I've evolved, is the phrase.
Yeah, it's a very wordsmithy thing. I wouldn't go that. I wouldn't let somebody get away with that. There's no the things that are proposed. Most of them, a president can't just do. And a lot of these people who say, I'm going to do it by executive action, riled against Donald Trump doing things by executive action, but it'd be okay if they were president.
So gun control through executive action, as Senator Harris advocates, though you want greater gun control, you don't think that's an
against
effective way
the law,
to get at it.
not going to happen. You have to go, and you have state-led, it's a state issue, incidentally. You could do it at federal level as well, but not going to happen. You go, and you have to get the legislature to pull together and the governor to sign a bill if you can get him to pass it. And so far, we've worked very hard, and there's 20-something states that already have background checks for gun show sales and internet sales. Everybody's got it for gun store sales. That's a federal law. But it's, you just can't walk in and say, I'm going to fix education. I'm going to get rid of crime. I'm going to cure homelessness. Those are problems that require enormous amount of time, resources, local involvement, and generally they're not things that the federal government is involved in. So it's easy to go and pick things that you're not going to have anything to do with. Or the other side of the coin is you can say, okay, I'm going to cure global warming by the year 2050. Well, if you do the math, and I've done it a number of times, there is nobody in office today that is going to be in office in 2050. As a matter of fact, most of them won't be alive. So to promise something that 5 generations of your successors are going to have to deal with is just a fraud on the public. Stop this stuff. I mean, hopefully the public is smart enough to realize that you're just pandering to them.
Well, we are out of time, but I have to ask you, though, why does your name keep showing up as a potential late ad to the Democratic race? Are you going to run for president?
I think the answer is you've got to call Judge Judy and ask her.
It was in the New York Post just last week. So, but to be clear, are you completely closing the door to a 2020 run?
I put out a statement in March saying and outlining why I was not running
That was March.
for president, and nothing's changed other than the calendar.
So you're kind of closing the door.
No, I didn't say that. It's just X number of months later, nothing's changed. You know, I have my reservations about the people running and the way they're campaigning and the promises they're making that they can't fulfill and their unwillingness to really admit what is possible and what isn't, and their inconsistency from day to day and location to location. This is not the ways to run a railroad. This country is in real trouble. We need somebody to pull people together. And when they say, I'm not going to talk to somebody from across the aisle, this is our country. What do you mean you're not going to talk to somebody from across the aisle? We've got to work together. And I don't see that. And we've had presidents that don't try to pull people together. In this case, the current one tries to pull people apart. We have legislators, go and take the Democratic candidates and say, okay, give us a list of the Republicans that you work with all the time. Mm-hmm. And if they can't come up with any, shame on them.
I'm hearing a maybe.
It's a part, we're making, you got to say again?
I'm hearing a maybe.
No. It's a partisan.
It wasn't a no.
We're turning government into a partisan issue when there's a time for partisanship, but once you get elected, you should pull together. And I've always thought one of the things that's wrong with our government system, the way it's structured, is the President of the United States is elected, but then retains the interest as being his or her party leader, rather than switching their focus and saying, I'm now here for the whole country. Mm-hmm. And they just don't do that. And that's what's really hurting us. And other countries who don't have as a tradition of democracy the way we do, and so I'm not in favor of what they do, but they don't, that's one of the problems they don't have. They do pull together in a ways that we need to do. Not suggesting we should change our system. I think this is the land of the free, the home of the brave. This is where people want to go when they vote with their feet. I could not be so, I can just imagine if my great-grandparents hadn't come here, where I wouldn't have been alive, I wouldn't have survived, I wouldn't have been born. But nevertheless, we do so much right. Unfortunately, we're walking away from some of that, and we should not be doing it.
All right. A maybe. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Go.
For In It Together, Reimagining Freetown, welcome Yvonne Aki Sawyer, the mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone, here with Dan Porterfield, the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute.
Welcome, Madam Mayor. It's great to be able to host you here from one awesome mayor to another. Let me begin with a few thanks to Bloomberg Philanthropies, Patty Harris, Mayor Bloomberg, for really awesome leadership in philanthropy. Mayor Muriel Bowser, the great team at Atlantic, led by my friend David Bradley, the great team at my organization, the Aspen Institute, led in putting this together by Libby Franklin and Kitty Boone. So, you are an extraordinary leader. It is such an honor for us to be able to host you here today. And let's just jump right into it. You lived away from Sierra Leone and your city for a while, and then you came back. What brought you back?
Thank you very much, Dan. The return back started, well, I guess I should clarify something. Yes, I lived away, but as so many people know now, the world's a global village. So even though I was working in London, Sierra Leone, Freetown was still my home. So in the whole 20 years or so that I was abroad, I got involved with the war. I set up a not-for-profit in 1999. I started to invest in the economy in 2011. But that was all doing that commute, as you do across the Atlantic. But in 2014, there was an outbreak of Ebola. And I was in London at the time. The first case was in May, 25th of May. And a state of emergency was declared in July. And I found myself unable to watch it on TV. So as the case numbers rose, and after doing some advocacy and media appearances, raising the profile and trying to get international interest and support, in November, on the 13th of November, 2014, I got on a rather empty plane and flew back to Freetown. to volunteer and be involved in the Ebola response. So that act, which at the time I thought was a 3-month, okay, 3 months, this will all be over, I'll play my part, I'll come back, get on with my life, went on for a year. Yeah. And the outbreak was declared over on the 7th of November, 2015. By the month after I arrived in Freetown, I was asked to lead the response as Director of Planning for the National Ebola Response Center. So when the outbreak ended, I got on a plane on the 11th, got a call 3 weeks later, and it was an honor, really. I was asked to lead the Recovery Priorities Program, the post-Ebola for the government as a consultant. And I suppose that's what really took me. So Ebola, and then I stayed on, and then, as people say, one thing leads to another. But in this case, I suppose working with the government, particularly on issues which were really challenging, caused me to see what the municipality was like, what council was like, what local government was like. I felt there were some gaps, and I thought I might step forward and try and do something about it.
And you did that, and saved lives. 25 years of private sector experience, an accountant, all kinds of work on strategic planning and strategic development and partnerships, and then suddenly you go back home, you say yes to saving lives. And what did you learn from that experience of leading the effort against Ebola? And then why did you go on and decide to put your name up and run for office?
Ebola is most easily the most challenging experience, that Ebola response that I've ever had in my life. I think most people saw it on their TV screens, and you know that it was, death by touch. But when you have a situation where hundreds, thousands of people are dying, and there's no cure, and what you need to do is really change behavior. So what did I learn? The biggest thing I learned, and I still really practice it very much in my role as mayor today, is the importance of bringing people along with you. Yeah. And actually, the Bloomberg program, there's a session with the Bloomberg Harvard, where they talk about narratives and the story of we. And that is something which, I learned during Ebola and fine-tuned here with Harvard Bloomberg. The decision in the end, like I said, was really driven by the concern of the lack of provision or the lack of action being taken about something that I feel really dearly about, and that's the environment. So I said I saw gaps in the public sector, I saw gaps in the local council, but those gaps really, at the time, that were most visible to me were around sanitation and the environment, the rapid deforestation of our city, and the impact that that was having on people's lives.
So you're a real sort of management geek. You care a lot about counting and getting it right and demonstrating progress towards big goals. And you've led that way. You've established a whole plan with all sorts of outcome measures to try to improve the quality of life in Freetown. And how's it going? What's been the result so far?
Really encouraging. Yeah. But let me start off and just give people a little bit of a picture of what Freetown looks like. Geographically, it's mountains, a plain, and the sea. So we have the Atlantic Ocean. It's absolutely beautiful. So I'm doing my tourism pitch here. For anybody planning your holidays, you know where to go. But against that beauty are some really significant challenges. From up to 2001, we had an 11-year war. I grew up in a city with 500,000 people. After the war, the population doubled to 1 million. It's now growing at 4.2% per annum. And so we're estimated to be 2 million people by 2028. Now, Freetown, in terms of geography, accounts just for 0.1% of the landmass. But we now house about over 15% of the population. So really densely populated. And that has been the driver for a lot of the challenges that we're now grappling with. Challenges with the environment, with deforestation, the destruction of the mangroves, because people are looking for a place to live. I often say that the American Constitution, that line, in pursuit of happiness, speaks for the world over. Everybody wants a future. So they're looking for homes They're cutting down indiscriminately. There was no urban planning. The waste management systems had broken down during the war, and they hadn't been put back. So I came into this position with statistics which went something along these lines. Only 6% of liquid waste was being collected. Those of you who run cities know how bad that is. 21% of solid waste, 38% of children under the age of 5 dying from malaria, which again is linked to sanitation, and a young population. 75% of my population, my residents, are under the age of 35, but 60 to 65% of them are either unemployed or underemployed. So a little bit of a challenging sort of landscape there. But to your point, yes, I love data, which is why I just love Bloomberg Harvard. And from a management perspective, we came in, and my campaign, given that I've never been in politics before, never been in the public service, my campaign was very much sort of, PowerPoint, here are the strategy. This is what we're going to do. And people said to me, forget it. You need to just spend money, print T-shirts, have music. But they underestimated the extent to which people actually do want to pursue happiness. Yeah. The extent to which they do want to see somebody who's laying out to them how their children's lives can be better than their own. Yeah. So we did that, and it was called, our campaign slogan was for a community, for a progress, for a Freetown, which, when coming into office, became our transformation plan. #Transform Freetown. Yeah. And Transform Freetown has 4 clusters: resilience, human development, healthy city, and urban mobility. And within those 4 clusters are 11 priority sectors. And here I'll just say, I know for most people when you say the word priority, and my team kept saying that, you expect it's going to be less than 5. Yeah. But when you're starting from a base where everything is broken, we have 11 priority sectors, and I make no apologies. Yeah. So those 11 priority sectors really, from environmental management to urban planning and housing to revenue mobilization, and let me just say a word here for anybody who's thinking that you've got budget challenges. When I came into office in 2018, the revenue collected that year was the equivalent of $1.25 per person. So we have a long way to go. But the good news is, for our 11 priority sectors, we have set out, I'll take you back to my Ebola days, and the understanding that you've got to bring community along. We had, in my first 2 months, focus groups with 15,000 residents in 322 communities, and we talked about what we wanted to do. We then got technical professionals in, we got central government parties in, development partners, NGOs, community-based organizations, and for each of those sectors, we set teams. And we've come out with 19 targets, 37 initiatives. We will move the dial. We will transform Freetown. It's a journey that started, and it's a journey that I'm convinced. Thanks. So what are some of those targets? In sanitation, we're moving from that low base to at least 60% safely collected and disposed of. In housing, there hasn't been any housing built for over 40 years, and there's been no planning. There actually is no building code, and there is no plan. So we're building a master plan. We're introducing a building code. We're introducing new sanitation legislation. With education, we're bringing in monitoring of schools and impact of teachers. When it comes to revenue mobilization, we are increasing taxes. And I said it in the campaign, and we've done it. We increased local tax, we increased market dues, we doubled. And we only had 25% of our population of the properties actually on the database. We're going through a process now. We started the pilot, but we're now geomapping the entire city. We use technology a lot. We have an app called Find Me in Freetown, and that basically locates you wherever you are in the city. It tells you what your ward is. It tells you everybody who collects waste, and we're just building on that. We're creating jobs in the green economy, but we're also promoting jobs through tourism. Our Discover Freetown campaign is being launched in the next couple of weeks. So there's a lot going on, and we're really excited. When it comes to flood mitigation, the city had terrible flooding. That was a low-hanging fruit. We tackled that as soon as I came in. For the first time in 5 years, in 2018, there was no flood. And that was because of the work that we did. So we're building confidence as well. People are seeing at a practical level that there is now a local government in their city.
I feel those that are watching the Democratic primary yearning for this kind of voice. Can I ask you this, though? Here we are gathered together with mayors from 44 cities with one of the great philanthropies in the world supporting our effort. What can people here do that could be a help to your work in Freetown?
Well, I want to first of all acknowledge that I'm sitting here. And that is already a help to my work in Freetown. And for that, I want to say thanks to Mayor Bloomberg and his team, and to the Harvard team, and to all my colleague mayors. And we've been saying that over the last few days. Those of us who are in BH2 cohort, we're all still in touch. And we really, really encourage one another. Teaming. We do a lot of that in Freetown because I have a city of 1.2 million people, but I walked into a council with a staff of 500. And that's right across the board. So that begins to tell you where our capacity challenges are. So on a practical level, I know every mayor in this room already has enough on their plate, and they're probably not thinking about how they can help Freetown, but just in case you are. Just in case you are. Resource, we've had great support from around the world. We've had people volunteer, engineers come in and say, I want to be part of this. I've had some great consultants from McKinsey, 6 now from different parts of the world, who've given their time pro bono, 3 months at a time, made an arrangement with McKinsey. They've been very supportive of that. We've got agencies, Mayor's Migration Council, who are supporting the work I'm doing on migration, which is an issue. My view is that nobody should be crossing the Atlantic, or not the Atlantic, but crossing the Mediterranean because they feel forced to. People need to have an option. Yeah. They need to have the choice to stay home and have a good life at home. So we work with the Mayor's Migration Council on some initiatives to engage with strengthening some of our job creation, skills development targets. So from here, private sector, we're looking at some concrete bankable investments, which will make a big difference in some of our infrastructure challenges. But of course, like I said at the beginning, capacity, teaming with other cities who may be in a position to want to learn. It's two-way. We've got a lot to offer. In spite of all the challenges, because we've gone through that, because we're going through that, we've got insights too that could be shared. Indeed. This world is woven of many strands, and our fate is to become one and many. You're leading the way. Thank you so much, Mayor, for being here today. Thank you.
Fight for your home. Fight for your
Escape.
This here? This is the edge, bruh. The final frontier of manifest destiny. Last edge of the city. Man, 2 steps further, you'll be drinking that filthy salt water. But we built these ships, dredged these canals. Into San Francisco, they never knew existed. And now they come to build something new? Whole blocks, half in the past, half in the future. But should you venture into their San Francisco, the one they pillaged for gold, remember your truth in the city of facades.
And now, to discuss his film, The Last Black Man in San Francisco, please welcome actor Jimmy Fails. He's here with Atlantic staff writer Derek Thompson.
Hi. Good morning. Last Black Man in San Francisco is an extraordinary new film starring our next guest, Jimmy Fails. It debuted in Sundance this year. It won the prizes for Best Directing and a special jury prize. It has been on many top 10 lists, including the New York Times' most recent top 10 list. And as I was going online looking at some odd sites that were nominating or predicting the Best Picture nominations for the Oscars next year, there was one site that did not list Last Black Man in San Francisco among their top 7 films, and the entire comment section was just people recommending Last Black Man in San Francisco to be nominated, just to give you a sense of this film's appeal and impact already. So, Jimmy, tell us what this film is about.
Wow. Well, as weird as it sounds, I usually say it's a love story between a man and a house, even though that does sound weird. But that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's, it's about a lot of things, though. It's about, identity, facing the changes of your city, that's why we chose the title, Last Black Man. San Francisco is less than 4% black, so it can start to feel weird if that's not how you grew up, you know what I mean? So it's more about the changes of the city and also, family and home. It was a family home, ownership, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and you live in San Francisco. This film is in part based on your life. Tell me a little bit about your experience and your life and how that inspired the plot of this film.
Well, I think in San Francisco, it's kind of a city of facades now because it's supposed to be to everyone like this liberal epicenter of the country, but it's like the biggest wealth gap. It's like ground zero for gentrification. But like growing up, it was like a big melting pot, and you grow up in knowing about all these different cultures and different people, so it's it's weird to see that sort of change happen in a city that's so built on like its art, and artists used to come there when they felt like they couldn't be accepted in their own communities wherever it was. So it's more of a gold rush now than coming there for like an artist sort of safe haven, because it used to be like the Grateful Dead was there, Janis Joplin, all these cool, so, and it's kind of been built on that sort of artist history, so it's weird to see it change like that.
It's an extraordinary film because, the story that you just told is a definitionally sad story, a story of gentrification, of people losing their homes, but the movie has an extraordinary humor to it. There's like a whimsical humor that's sort of laced throughout it. And I think that comes out in the next clip that we're going to show you, clip 2.
Jesus, man.
Oh,
Honey.
just get the heck out of here, man.
He's not hurting anything, Mayor.
Oh, he's painting the house now?
Well, yeah.
Stop fixing my house.
I'm almost done. Just hold on.
Why don't you just paint the neighbors' houses? Theirs are worse than ours.
Just hold on 1 second.
I mean, we appreciate it in some way, but yeah, it's weird, man.
I'm almost done.
Look, we will call the cops, man, and I mean it this time.
No, we're not going to call the cops. We're not calling the cops. Just stop coming back.
I'm almost done. Hold on, please. Hold on.
Oh, just get off my fucking birdie bath. Get out of here, man.
Those are $3.
Fine. I'll finish it next time. God.
Next time, oh, just get the heck off my
Just
birdie
water
bath.
the plants in the back, or I will.
Oh.
Jimmy, why are you painting their house?
Because that's my house. No, well, that's, my character in the movie is, supposed to be sort of naive in that way. It's a house that my grandfather owned, and, I believe he built it. In my mind, that's what's drawing me to the city. So it's like, the house represents a lot for me in that sense, so. It represents a place where my family was. My family has been split since then. I'm not in contact with a lot of them, but I used to live with a lot of them in that house. So, it was just a place that meant a lot to me. Still does, but
Yeah. Well, so this is a film that you and your partner have been working on for a long time, for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. And this is your first This is your first time acting in a film like this. This is the director's first time writing a film and directing in a film that's been released through A24 and released to the public. Tell me a little bit about the experience of working on a film like this. How did you get it in front of people who finally turned it into the sort of film that is brought to Sundance?
Man, I mean, I feel like we got really lucky. We didn't know what we were doing, honestly, at all. Like, we thought that we could, make the movie with no script at one point, and that we could shoot it on Technicolor, which is not, So, yeah, exactly. So that's how naive we were. But, we just did, we've been making movies together our whole lives, like not movies that necessarily anybody saw, because we were like, youth filmmakers. But we just tried to, we put together like a concept trailer to kind of show people what we wanted to make. So it's just like a small kind of montage of me narrating the family story that inspired the film mainly. And Joe did some music to it and kind of cut it all up. And we put that online. And this lady, Elizabeth something, she's a really cool lady. She put it on her blog, and I forget her last name, but she put it on her blog, and people started to reach out to us and say like, oh, I like this short, and I want to get this movie made, like people in the Bay Area. And we were like the only filmmakers, as far as we were concerned, in the city and in the Bay Area. We didn't really know any other filmmakers, so we had met them through putting that video out. And we were, iffy about even putting it out, but luckily it worked out, and we met like Kalia Neal, the lead producer, and Rob Rickard, one of the main people that helped us write it and develop it, and we met all these cool people. So it really was just, a movie like that, it takes a lot of collaboration, and we just got lucky to meet the right people.
That's great. And what's the reception been like? I mean, it must just feel so heady to have millions of people reacting to a film that's not only a passion project for you, but also a reflection of your own life. I mean, what has that felt like?
Well, definitely weird at first, but it's been. I mean, it's like a beautiful thing to see people, responding to it and relating to a lot of stuff in the movie. But it's also kind of, unfortunately, universal. We like to say, just because I feel like the reason why it sits with so many people is because it's happening literally everywhere. You know what I mean? We've went a lot of places with this movie, Switzerland, London, a lot of places, and they're all being gentrified as well. So it's like, it makes sense.
Right. And it's a great setup for the third and final clip that we're going to show you today.
Excuse me? You don't get to hate San Francisco.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, dude, I mean, sorry, but I'll hate what I want.
Do you love it?
Yeah, I'm here, but do I have to love it?
You don't get to hate it unless you love it.
This is a really powerful scene where those two, yeah.
Oh, you don't got it.
Those two women on the bus have been trash talking San Francisco just before the scene cuts in, and then you tell them you can't hate San Francisco unless you love it. You live in San Francisco. This movie has a lot of negative feelings about the city. Do you love it?
I do, but it's, it's mixed feelings. Sometimes I feel like it doesn't love me back. You know what I mean? So it's a complicated relationship, but I've grown up in that city. I'll always love it. It'll always be my home. But, because I've grown up there and, I've fought for my city by at least making a piece of art, that's, highlighting some of the issues that we're having. I can say something about San Francisco, but I'm not necessarily going to just let you do that in front of me.
Yeah.
What I mean? It's just like, it's like you can, it's like your brother. Like you can talk smack about your brother, but you're not going to let someone else do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
this is an audience with a lot of mayors and a lot of people that are in charge of housing policy for their cities and their places. What is it that you want this crowd specifically to take away from this film and from your message in making this film?
I think that it's important to try to preserve the culture and the people and make the cities affordable, especially my city in particular. It's like if artists aren't able to be there, we are the people that move the culture, and we are the people that keep the city unique in that way. So I think it's important to have that, and you know, there's also obviously ways to, you know, make your art political as well. So I think it's very important to be preserving that, and also, like, you know, keeping the city diverse. It's like the fact that San Francisco is less than 4% black is kind of absurd, you know. So I think it's important to try to preserve those sort of things and those values, because when you don't preserve those things and the people that make the city what it is, then you got all these people coming in that are, you know, they're mainly for tech or whatever, and they're from, like, I don't know, Wisconsin. No disrespect to anyone that's from Wisconsin, but they just bring these, like, you know, small town values to a city that's not built on that. You know what I mean? So I think it's important for, you know, gentrifiers to hear us out. You know, so, and I mean, that's how it starts. It's like this movie just starts the conversation, really. But, you know, I think you need to know about the history, for one, of wherever you're moving into, and you need to know about the people that you're pushing out.
Yeah. I mean, housing policy is something that is talked about at every single CityLab, but I don't think that we have had someone on stage who participated in a project, a film like this, that was so critically acclaimed, where a house was literally one of the main characters in the film. And the house really is. I mean, the way that it changes and the way that your character and the other characters experience the house is just really fascinating and profound throughout the film. Have you had conversations about this movie, about the process, the message of the film, with people who work in housing policy, whether it's San Francisco or Geneva if you're traveling in Switzerland, and heard the reactions to the story?
Actually, no. We've had a few meetings where it's funny because they want us to, me and Joe, to speak at the Salesforce Tower, which we don't necessarily support. so you know what I mean? So it's weird trying to figure that out, but, you know, we also want to be definitely talking to those sort of officials, you know, people that are higher up, but we haven't talked to that many people about it. But we, you know, every time we do a Q&A or whatever it is, like we're always, like, you know, trying to, you know, remind people that we got to abolish the Ellis Act, which is like a very terrible, you know, it's like that's like an act that's like against rent control and like a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah, we're trying, man, but we're just artists.
Do you, in San Francisco itself, have you sensed a change in the last few years? I feel like for a decade, maybe like right after the Great Recession, between, I don't know, 2007, 2017, there was this period of just, you know, rampant gentrification, just housing prices going crazy throughout San Francisco. And maybe it's some period in the last maybe 3 to 5 years, I've sensed this idea that the city has hit a breaking point, where there's an understanding that something has to be done about affordable living here, because people who have been here, like you and your family for generations, cannot afford to stay in the city that they call their home. Have you seen that energy? Have you seen the beginning of it? Or do you think San Francisco is still stuck in that decade of fast growth and not enough thinking about making it a city where people who've lived there can call it home?
Man, it doesn't really feel like it's leaning towards the right way, which is why we're, you know, trying to work, you know, because it's very violent, you know, and it's just so rapid. It's like I'm only gonna be here a few days. It'll probably be different by the time I get back. You know what I mean? But you know, I mean, all you can do is, you know, show up to, you know, events like this and talk to the right people and just try to get your voice heard in there. But it's like it's hard when they're pushing most of those people out. So it's like they can't even show up to the city to even have these sort of meetings because they're so far out. It's like people commute very far just to come work in the city so they can, you know, make city pay. And, you know, so it's, you know, it's just, it's a battle, but I'm here to fight that battle for sure.
Yeah. Well, I keep fighting the battle. Hopefully this film makes it to the Oscars, picks up a couple nods, maybe for Best Actor, maybe for Director and Cinematography. Who knows, even Best Picture. Jimmy Fails, thank you so much, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
For a conversation about the city's taking a stand against gun violence, welcome Mayor Sam Liccardo of San Jose, California, Mayor Michelle De La Isla of Topeka, Kansas, and Mayor Greg Fisher of Louisville, Kentucky. Here to lead the conversation is PBS NewsHour's Amna Nawaz.
Hi, thanks to all of you for being here, and thank you to this incredible panel of mayors for being here as well. We are here to talk about gun violence. This panel is called Fighting Fire, Cities Stand Against Gun Violence. We all know the statistics, right? Nearly 40,000 Americans killed every year with guns, an additional 100,000 wounded every year. The national debate, I think we can all agree, kind of overshadows often what's happening on the front lines when it comes to gun violence, and that's what we want to talk about today, is what local leaders can and are doing to combat gun violence in their own communities. So I'd love to just go down the line and kind of set the table with this conversation to talk about, of all the issues that you struggle with every day, that you manage every day in your communities, Mayor Fisher, let's start with you. Why is it that you wanted to come here to talk about gun violence in particular?
Well, when you think about who gun violence impacts in our community, I mean, the facts are we're losing 100 people a day throughout the United States right now. And just think about that slow drumbeat of death that's happening to where most of us in America have become desensitized to this type. So if we were losing 100 soldiers a day, I mean, the whole country would be saying, what is it that we're going to do about this? So in our community, to me, it's a fight for the soul of what we stand for. In most cities, that daily drumbeat usually includes a young man or boy of color, where there'll be 20 guys like that killed today, if it's an average day in our country. So when we get our attention because of the massacres that are taking place, those are the sensationalized headlines. But what about the one guy in Louisville, or the two guys in San Jose, or wherever it might be, and where's the outrage over that? So I think that's a real fight for the soul of our country, to say, does everybody count in our country? And the answer should be yes. So what is it that we're doing about that? So that's one of the major reasons why we focus on that. And plus, the job of a mayor is to keep people alive for a long time and be healthy. So it obviously gets in the way of what we're doing. So for me, I start with a moral argument that this just is not right, the conditions in our country. So how do you bring the power of the mayor's office against this challenge?
Mayor De La Isla, what about you?
Well, Topeka, Kansas had last year one of the most grueling years for us. I mean, we had 27 shootings that resulted in deaths in our community, and they were all amongst individuals of color, very sadly, and it was gang-related. But I think that in addition to that, we were talking about this backstage. I will never forget getting a text message from my daughter saying, "Mom, we are hiding in my school. There is an active shooter outside." And Lorraine's school is 2 blocks away from my house. And we don't live in the most affluent neighborhood, but we live in a really good neighborhood. And the trauma that my daughter has had from that situation, it's everywhere. And I think that as we start thinking in our communities, I was talking to one of my emergency management people, and he said, we have to stop thinking of if it happens in our community. We have to be prepared for when. And to think that that is what we're having to think of, that our children are having to think of when they go to school, that our neighbors are having to think of when they're living in the sanctity of their home, is just not acceptable.
Mayor Liccardo, it's not an if in your community, right? You've had to face what mayors would consider to be their worst nightmare when you had a shooting in your own community.
Well, certainly. And, for many years, we've been working on safe gun storage laws and many other ordinances, really nibbling at the edges. But then when obviously a horrible mass shooting happens in or around your community, it becomes much more real. And in our case, in the summertime, we lost 6-year-old Stephen and 13-year-old Kayla, along with others in a Gilroy shooting. And although Gilroy is a town just outside of San Jose, there are residents, of course. We sent 100 cops down there to try to find the shooter. And you just realize the extraordinary disruption that happens in the life of a community, and obviously the horror to the family. And, after just reading so many messages from Washington about prayers, you just realize it's time for us to actually do something. And fortunately, at the local level, there are things we can do. And that's why I decided to really dig in on this issue.
And I want to stick with you for a second because what you proposed within weeks of that shooting was pretty novel. And if and when it goes into place, it would be among the more strict measures across the country. But you're asking that people, gun owners, would be required to buy liability insurance, right? Tell me about how that would help curb gun violence.
Yeah, and it's actually not my idea. A couple folks have tried to propose this at the legislative level in New York and in California, but it hadn't succeeded. It was right after Sandy Hook. Essentially, our view is that we know the public bears the cost of gun violence in so many ways, and if gun owners essentially are receiving an unfair subsidy for their ownership, and that cost is not borne by them in some way, then we are incentivizing gun ownership. And it seems to me that what we ought to be doing, if we have 40,000 deaths a year from automobile accidents, and similarly about 40,000 deaths a year from gun violence, and we require automobile drivers to carry insurance, there's no reason why gun owners should not also have insurance. And the hope is that insurance could incentivize people to do the right things if they are going to own guns. That is, buy the safes and ensure that there are child-safe locks and ensure that people take gun safety training, et cetera, that will help reduce their premiums.
Mayor DeLisa, we talked a little bit about this backstage, but even nationally, we've seen the role that young people have played when it comes to at least even changing the conversation and getting people to focus on gun violence. I was looking up statistics in Topeka. People between the ages of 25 and 44 make up the largest age group, and people under 18 make up another quarter of the population. How are you accessing that energy or the willingness to have the conversation, leveraging that community?
So I have been involved in youth initiatives for many years. We actually have a girls' conference that's been going on for 11 years. Over 200 girls come to that conference. But in addition to that, I think that the more meaningful thing that we're doing is that we have an amazing youth council. And I don't set the agenda. My role is to run the meeting as the mayor, like I would with my council. But they set the agenda, and I bring the resources. And they had 3 things that they wanted to discuss this year. The first meeting was place setting. The second meeting was mental health. The third meeting was gun violence. And it was empowering. We invited every single person at the federal level for the Shawnee County delegation, the city, and the county. And only one person showed up from the state. Our federal delegation was in session, and nobody else showed up. However, from that conversation, it was amazing the insight that they got from our chief of police and from the representative that were there. And they are so excited about the information they have received that the plan that we have is that we're going to gather information, match it up with national things that are best practices. Because, I mean, nobody is against guns. We are about gun sense. And they're going to write a resolution to present it not only to the city, to the council, to the state, and provide that resolution with their ideas to the federal level as well.
And do you find that that has support within the rest of the community too? Does everyone feel the same way that the youth council does?
I think that in Kansas, it's a very different conversation. I think that when you talk to children, to youth, the conversation, absolutely. In the young people, when you talk to the college students, they're concerned. Yeah. I mean, we had a very tragic loss. Corey Ballantyne was shot in my community, and then may DeJuan Johnson rest in peace. He was his football mate that they were in a party and something tragic happened. So we have that. I don't think that the adults are quite as keyed in as our young people are to this issue.
What about you, Mayor Fisher? Now, you are in a unique position because you cannot take any action if the state doesn't support that action, right? You can't take that locally on your own.
I'm preempted from any action to the point where if I do take action, I'm legally held liable for, I think it's a Class D felony, as a matter of fact, to show you how absurd some of this happens in states where you have, really red legislators that want to basically hug the gun and say we don't have gun problems. So we're limited in what we can do that way, but I'm not limited in terms of using the pulpit that a mayor has to create outrage in a community over the situation that leads to all these deaths that are taking place across our country. So one of the ways that we can do that is to educate folks. So at the beginning of the school year, a grandmother approached me and asked me if I thought it was a good idea for her to buy a bulletproof backpack for her young grandchild that was starting kindergarten. I'm sure that took place all over the community. So imagine how you would feel if you're a grandma and your precious 6-year-old is going off to kindergarten and you're having to think about that. And say, that's where we're at in the United States of America right now. Imagine, when I've gone to D.C. and talked to the White House and the Senate, and they say, this is too hard, it's too political to get something like this done. And imagine you're that grandma showing up and your grandchild's body has been ripped apart by assault rifles. So one thing I did was say, you know what? Wouldn't it make a lot of sense if we trained everybody on how to respond when a bullet rips through your body? Okay, this is a Stop the Bleed kit from the University of Louisville Hospital. It's our trauma hospital. And to make people outraged, I say, you need to know what happens if a gun pierces through somebody that you know or don't know, how to apply the gauze, how to put a tourniquet on here. And people are like, oh my God, this mayor's crazy. I said, no, it is practical, but I want you to be outraged to the point that we demand action from these elected officials. I mean, what's radical is nothing is being done when we lose 100 of our citizens each and every day. That's what's radical.
You mentioned your conversations on the Hill with members of Congress as well. You've come out in support of expanding background checks, passing red flag laws, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. What are those conversations like with national leaders, with the federal leaders who haven't really acted on any of these yet?
They're sad. I think it's the idea that America can do nothing about gun violence, I think, is a betrayal to who we are as a country. It's a betrayal to people that fight and lose their lives for us each and every day. It's a betrayal to our public safety officials. And so when you have publicly elected officials in the sanctity and safety of their offices wanting to say this is a difficult thing to do politically and you just don't understand, I think they're the ones that don't understand. And as I said earlier, if we were losing 100 lives to something else every day, we'd be on top of it. So I'm not real optimistic at this level because they're also waiting for the president to do something. And of course, there's a lot of distractions that they have. So it's not acceptable. So this has to become an issue that motivates people to vote. To say, if you're against common sense gun safety reform, you're out of there. And only when people see the power of the voter being more powerful than the power of the NRA and the gun lobby will this thing start turning around.
Mayor Liccardo, you have something specific on the table. You've got this insurance proposal. Tell me about the kind of support that it's gotten, what opposition you're facing, how you're getting people to support it, and what kind of difference you think it makes if and when it goes into place.
Well, we've had great support in the community, wonderful organization. I think many of you have Moms Demand Action organization in your own cities. They are a great base of support for change at the local level, and I'm grateful for every town's support of their efforts. But we know as soon as this becomes an ordinance, we're going to face a challenge in court. The good news is we've had a lot of lawyers stepping up saying, we'll help you out pro bono. We think this is a fight worth fighting, and I think they're right. I'm a recovering lawyer myself, and I'd clear my desk for a case like this.
Mayor De La Isla, you mentioned maybe some tension I picked up there between what the Youth Council is pushing forward and some of the older residents who may not necessarily support some of the same measures. It feels like every time there's another big public mass shooting, we have the conversation again, and everyone says, what can we do and what can be done? It sounds like you've got real ideas and some level of support. So how do you have the conversation with the people who don't necessarily support those same actions? What do you say to them?
So it's very interesting. I have very purposefully engaged my friends that are gun owners to try to understand what the resistance is to even legislation, what the concerns are. And I think that what I get back from the counterparts that do believe in having their weapons is They feel that having a weapon helps save. Like if there's a bad person, me having a weapon can save, and deal with the issue before the police officers come. And the other one that I've heard is, my son uses a semi-automatic weapon when he goes hunting deer. And I mean, so there's all this rhetoric. I think that you know what the sad thing is? I think that for individuals that may have their weapons and they're using it responsibly, which I think that is the conversation that sometimes we don't differentiate. We have individuals that are very safe gun owners, and we don't want to penalize those individuals. We understand that the other argument that I get is that, bad people are going to get the guns regardless. How are you going to deal with that? But I think that it's not until people that are not impacted by this have their own experience with somebody that they know and love, that we're not going to get to the place, and it's something that I don't wish on anybody, please understand that, but I don't think that until somebody has that pain, that they'll understand that there is something that has to be done. And the sad part is that at the national level, we have a very powerful arm lobbying for nothing to happen. And until we're able to remove that barrier, I don't think anything's going to happen because people are just set in their ways. So we just need to continue having those very difficult conversations, learning about what the other side is seeing, and then start to figure out what are the things that we can agree upon so that we can at least start moving forward.
I agree with what Michelle said, but I would say that, as cities, we can be a force multiplier. NRA may be able to fight in a focused way in Congress, but what we're able to do individually, they can't match in cities throughout the country. And so that's why I'm just so proud that so many mayors are stepping out on these issues, because I think if we're collectively engaging them, it's going to be a lot harder for them to fight us all.
Well, that was related to my next question to you, was what role do you think you can play? Because the national conversation is where it is, federal inaction is where it is. What role do you think other leaders like yourselves can play in this conversation?
Well, I mean, Greg certainly gave a great example of how he can start to change the perspective on the problem by really making people understand in a real way how gun violence affects them. And certainly what we're trying to do, obviously we've got to probably fight it through the courts, we'd expect, but as I believe, we have what will be something that will be upheld and constitutional. Hopefully other cities and states can follow. All of us have tried ideas and stolen each other's good ideas. I know most of what we implement in San Jose has been stolen from one of my colleagues, one way or another, and that's how we make good policy.
Mayor Fisher, you're going to say something.
Well, I just think we got to jump up for a minute and say, why do we have so many gun deaths in our country? Well, one, obviously, when you have 400 million guns on the streets of America and access to guns is so plentiful. I mean, that talks about the suicide aspect of that. 60% of all these 100 deaths are by suicide by gun, 95% lethality. Most suicide other attempts are like 3%, and they only happen one time. So that's one issue. The second issue is inability for young people in particular to solve disputes. We're seeing an alarming increase in young guys that are doing, social media bullying, that then you've disrespected me, so then it comes out to the street, I can easily get a gun, so we're going to solve it that way. And then the third issue is, when you have gun deaths involved with illegal narcotics trading, it's because people are dealing dope to make a living, and so we need to get to some pathway where people can have a living wage in our country so that their basic needs are set so they don't have to turn to crime to make a living. And they use the gun, obviously, to enforce the law that we have. So these are some of the bigger system issues that are at play, and until we really address those, we all have our violence reduction programs, but I'm afraid we're just kind of moving the chairs around on the ship without really addressing the big system.
We were talking about this backstage. Nothing happens in a silo, right? You mentioned the mental health aspect, the majority of the gun deaths in America as a result of suicide. Do you guys have the resources you need to address all of this holistically, mental health and gun violence and education and all of these things? Do you have what you need?
So I'll speak for Topeka. We have great partners in Family Service and Guidance Center, which is for children, and Vallejo, which is our mental health community mental health organization. We don't have enough beds. We don't have everything that we need. But I think that I want to echo a little bit on what you just said. I think that we have to talk about the issue of gun violence. The policies are going to help us mitigate some of the issues. But what we need to understand is that at the point in time in which one child has felt that the only way that they could deal with a problem is through violence, we have failed that child as a society. And I think that we have to start taking a look at what we're doing in our communities and how we are supporting conversations and things to occur so that our children don't feel like this is the only recourse to solve a problem. So we have resources, but I don't think that any of our communities are going to have enough resources to ever manage the crisis that we see in our communities with mental health.
I think that's right. No city ever has enough resources. I think, though, increasingly we ought to be expecting that those who own guns will invest in the basic resources we need to keep our children safe. We have 4.6 million children in this country that live in a home with a loaded gun that is unlocked or available, that is not kept in a safe. Now, if we think about that for a moment, 4.6 million children. If we had mandates in every city and every state that you had to keep your gun in a safe and you had to have a child safe lock on it, think about what we could do around suicide prevention, what we could do around accidental shootings to prevent unnecessary deaths and injuries. It would be tremendous. That doesn't necessarily have to come from the general fund. We just need the courage to be able to move forward.
Mayor Fisher, I'll give you the final word here
Okay,
before we go.
and like I said, these are not radical ideas, right? Other countries are showing us that it can work. Why do we have 50 times the amount of gun deaths in our country over any other Western country? So again, we have to break through kind of the forces that are just wrapping themselves around the gun every day. And on one other issue, on do we have the resources? When you see the trauma that not only happens with gun deaths, but from the multiple generations, oftentimes, of the people that are involved using the gun, in the history of trauma in our country, and you think about, are we giving adequate mental health supports from the trauma side? This is not like something where you, okay, I've been traumatized, I'm going to go see my doctor, and after 1 half-hour session, I'm all good. Okay, this is intensive treatment that's required, both to get myself in balance mentally, but then also to have a hopeful future, hopeful connection to the future as well. So we got a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do. So we focus a lot on the gun, but let's focus on the downstream stuff that we can do to address the gun issues also.
A lot of work to do. It's a good place to leave the conversation, I think. Mayor Greg Fisher, Mayor Michelle de la Isla, Mayor Sam Liccardo, thank you very much for being here.
Next, for a session produced by our underwriter, welcome Roger Enriquez, Director of the College of Public Policy at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and Fernando Godinez, the CEO of the Mexican-American Unity Council, here with Gerther Malia, Senior Policy Officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Good morning. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is the nation's largest philanthropy dedicated solely to improving health and healthcare in the United States. Our vision is to work with partners to create a culture of health in this country, which means that everybody has a fair and just opportunity to live out their full health potential. I think one of the things we've realized is that having access to safe, stable, and affordable housing is really foundational for good health. Additionally, we're seeing that housing policies, both of the past and the present, have created conditions that have led to the health inequities that we see today. So housing policy leading to health inequity. Today, we want to talk about a housing equity issue that may be a little less known to all of you. It's called tangled title. We have two amazing leaders with us today from San Antonio, Fernando Godinez and Roger Enriquez. To get us started, we want to watch this short video to understand how this issue is playing out in San Antonio.
A common West Side
And we're going to hear a little bit more about Mr. Gomez's story in a minute. But Fernando, I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit about the work of the Mexican American Unity Council.
Sure. The Mexican American Unity Council, or MAC, is a tax-exempt community development corporation. We were established in 1967, and we are located in the heart of the west side of San Antonio. We are a multi-service organization with a 50-year mission of strengthening our communities through affordable housing, education, and economic development. The west side of San Antonio is our space and is primarily of Latino descent. 70% of our population live in poverty. Our median income is about $26,000, and our graduation rate is about 50%. So in what we do, we concentrate on the housing, anything related to housing. So we help our families through a process to identify their needs and their goals. And so it was through this process that we identify this broken system of transferring ownership and wealth. And so what we discover is that through education, educating our clients of what not to do, is that we can transfer that wealth. And so we've concentrated on that piece.
That's great. Roger, I want to turn to you and ask, help us put this tangled title issue in the context of San Antonio as a whole.
Sure. So one of the things is that in this community that Fernando is describing, a long, traditional Latino community, you have folks who have acquired property, but through inheritance. But the legal procedures in order to be able to get title can be burdensome, and many of them did not follow the exact protocols necessary to be able to do that. So what ends up happening is you have folks that live in the home who don't have legal ownership in the home. Our team, which is about made up of UTSA students and attorneys, have identified that in one zip code alone, 78207, which is where MAC is, there's over 2,000 homes in need of these services. And so we have been working with MAC in order to be able to reach these folks.
And tell me, what did you and your team have to do to help Mr. Gomez's family?
So as we know, his mom died without a will, and the processes in order to be able to have title pass require some additional steps. We had to identify a couple folks in the community who were familiar with the home or with the family, and they ended up creating the documents necessary to establish the heirs, and then we simply executed a gift deed in favor of the Gomez brothers who were still alive. And so this was one mechanism by which we were able to do, but we have others as well, depending on the circumstances.
And I know you had spoken as well about how when you first started this work, the city said there are some organizations that you could work with. How did you sort of take that advice?
Yeah, so I think in the initial stages, folks said, why don't you use sort of pro bono legal or legal aid folks? But we knew that people were just not going to be comfortable. When people go to MAC, it's as if they're at their kitchen table talking to a trusted friend. And that's really the service that we need, because many of these folks don't need judgments, they need help.
Fernando, back to you, this idea of cultural trust. I know it's so important to the work that MAC does. Tell us why that's so significant for the communities you serve.
It's an important element. We serve multi-generational, multi-language families with different needs. And so what they get from MAC is that, or other organizations actually, is that, you know, if you go to them, you get an 800 number, you get a directory, and that you're all over the city chasing these services. With MAC, you get an open door. You get a person that knows the culture and knows the language. Our services is a one-stop shop, and they're free. And so we've been successful at attracting the families through that process.
Yeah, and in this particular climate that we have currently for immigrant families,
Yeah, I mean, our communities are living in fear, and in fear of sharing personal information. So we don't ask for what we don't need. We definitely have the trust of the community. We've been in the community for 50 years. If they don't need us today, they'll need us tomorrow, and we're at the same address. So they definitely come back year after year seeking help.
That's so important. Roger, we have a group of city leaders here. What should they think about as they are here and then head back home in terms of addressing Tangle Title?
Well, they're in circumstances similar to San Antonio, who's basically staring down the barrel of an affordability crisis. By 2050, demographers project that San Antonio's population will nearly double to nearly 3 million folks. So this initiative is really an attempt at curbing gentrification. If we can keep original residents in their home, that would be an important step. And so one of the things that they can do is we know that there are certain communities that are more at risk. They should take a very targeted, very strategic approach. Find out where those communities are and direct the services there. 2, they should think about things to lower the cost of recording title and any of those circumstances that make it burdensome. And 3, we are actually instituting things like mobile clinics, mobile city clerk offices that go into the communities and help people with doing either basic research on the title or actually even recording titles there in this mobile city clerk's office. So again, these are just some of the things that could help.
And I know that based on experiences in San Antonio, you and your team are also assisting leaders in Dallas put some of the same types of solutions in place.
That's exactly right. They took a very place-based approach in Dallas. Just recently, they allocated $500,000, and they had a very strategic approach, and we think that's an approach that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Fernanda, tell us what happened with Mr. Gomez's family, the gentleman in the video.
Sure. So Mr. Gomez was able to clear title for his mother's and brother's house, and now rents one of the homes to a family in Section 8. Between UTSA and MOC and our partners in the community, we've cleared title to over 100 properties, which equates to about $6 million in asset preservation. And we were actually being able to also bring in the families through our programming.
That's amazing. So 100 families and $6 million in preserved assets, and I know the work continues every day. Well, I want to thank you for being here, thank the audience, and say if you want more information about our work on housing, visit rwjf.org, and to learn more about MOC's work, mauc.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
On designing a city for everyone, here's Maria Vasilescu, the former deputy mayor of the city of Vienna, Austria.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am certainly excited to be here and to present Vienna to you. Who's been to Vienna already? Okay. Our tourism director would love to see that. Now, in the next couple of minutes, I'll take you for a bit of a different journey to Vienna. A short trip around not the historical parts of the city, but some other very interesting parts. And here we are. I love these views, actually, from the vineyards. Vienna is a rapidly growing city. It's a city of approximately 2 million, not yet 2 million, that is competing with Berlin as being the 2 fastest growing cities of the German-speaking area. We're growing at a pace of about 25,000 people per year, which means we have to build a small town each and every year, in addition to what we are already. Now, building a small town each and every year, if you design it properly, is always an opportunity to improve the already built city. And we must be doing something right, because you may have heard that we are regularly ranked as the world's most livable city. 2 years in a row, right now, according to Economist, and according to Mercer, 10 years in a row, which correspond to the 10 years that I was deputy mayor until I left office and changed my life last July. Now, you may be skeptical about counting livability with points, and you may be right. So this is why I would like to define this a little bit. I say a livable city is a city where people live because they want to, not because they have to. And when is a city livable? I say a city that's good for children is a city that's good for everybody. What's good for children? We want our children to grow up in a healthy environment, a safe environment. We want them to be able to move around freely, to play, to have contact to nature. Children love playing with water. These are all things that we love ourselves as well. And this is why young couples, when they know that the first child is arriving, tend to say, well, now we have to leave the city and move to the suburbs and buy a little cottage, which means that they end up living there. Now, I don't know if you agree with me, this is not a city. This is a carpet of boxes. And we know these kind of cities. They may go on for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers, but this has nothing to do with urbanity. So, these people end in their cars and spend all their lives stuck in traffic jams, trying to get to work and to bring their kids to school and everything. So I say a good city has to provide all the qualities I was talking about before at the heart of it. This is actually a new urban quarter in Vienna, and what you can see is actually subsidized housing. Now, Vienna is an extremely green city. More than 50% of our surfaces are green areas, and what's more, Vienna is a highly affordable city. Vienna engaged in social housing a century ago, which means that right now, 62% of our population, 62% of our population, live in social or subsidized flats, paying thus highly affordable rents. But these numbers are strikingly enough, but it's not about numbers, it's also about the qualities. What you can see here is a historical building of social housing, and I think you can already sense the qualities I've been talking about. Well, this is what it looks like today. This is an example of subsidized housing in Vienna today. It is actually a collaborative project because the new qualities have to do, of course, with involvement. So this was designed by the tenants themselves, and it provides anything you can imagine. It has lively ground floors. It's amidst a new neighborhood with mixed uses, with vast green spaces, with traffic calming. So the qualities I've been talking about, this is what we are reproducing whenever we have a chance to develop our city further. Just to give you an impression, this is a master plan of a new urban quarter. It's a former brownfield area that is being now converted into a new urban quarter. And this is another one. This is what it looked like in the master plan. And this is what it looks like today. It comprises urban farming as well. In one case, there's even a lake that people love to go for a swim, and what you can see at the back is subsidized housing. And that's another example. And this is an example of the lively communities that emerge in these new urban quarters and the way community life is also part of the feeling of togetherness, of belonging together, of ownership, of living in such a place. Which leads me actually to the already built city. Can you detect anything smart or inspiring here? I don't know. I wouldn't go for a walk there. I'd rather go for a walk there, because this is what it looks like now, after we pedestrianized it. It is Europe's long shopping street, which we turned into a pedestrian zone, and it also has 2 parts that were converted into shared space. And it leads me to my main point. There's a quote by Jane Jacobs. She said once, "The outside of the buildings is the inside of the city." And I couldn't agree more. It's been highly inspirational to me. And I believe that when we talk about livability in the already built city, we talk about public space. We talk about the places where we love to be, we slow down our pace, we can encounter each other, we can get inspiration. It is actually where city life happens. So I believe you need to have a focus in redesigning public spaces of poor quality everywhere in your city, and this just changes the feel of it dramatically. Now, in order to do so, you need a robust public transport system, which we have in Vienna. In Vienna, we have a highly affordable and very, very dense public transport system. And just to give you an idea of it, this is what the annual card for public transport looks like. Everyone almost in Vienna has it. About approximately 1 million people own it. And this is what it costs per day to use public transport in Vienna. So for €1 a day, I mean, for the Americans, $1, right? So close your eyes and imagine that for €1 per day, you could go anywhere you want, as often as you want to, using public transport. And then you realize why Vienna already has 73% of all everyday trips done by public transport, cycling or walking, and only 27% private car use. We plan to reduce this down to 20% within the next years. So it's a chance to take out the cars from streets and to pedestrianize and to improve public space. And this is just another example of a street that is being redone to look like this right now. The opening will be in 2 weeks from now. But it's also about using smart little ideas to create additional public space in very dense urban quarters. What you can here see is a terrace, actually, that was created hanging over a metro line. And this is what it looks like at night, just to give you another perspective of it. Of course, you need to involve the people when it comes to redesigning spaces. And, of course, there's controversy whenever you try to take out cars and introduce alternative modes. You can see this is not exactly the nicest picture of myself. And the people there were actually demonstrating against cycling. There is this as well. So you encounter this, and the best way to go about it, I personally believe, is to give people the lead themselves, which brings me to the third idea that I've brought with me. This is a community grant scheme that we introduced a few years ago. So people will receive a grant of €4,000 and can implement their own ideas to change a little corner, someplace within the neighborhood, according to their ideas. The only precondition is that it has to be free for everybody to use without needing any kind of consumption. And it's worked perfectly. It works on a dime, and we were able this way to have more than 300 such initiatives all over Vienna within 3 years. And the best thing about it is, once one of these initiatives has come to life within a neighborhood, it just changes the perspective of the whole neighborhood overnight. Next year, you have people from the next street, from the adjoining streets coming and wanting to do something like this themselves. And I think that this is good because this is not top-down. It's a bottom-up kind of inspiration that can really change the city. It's another example of what can be done on these grants. And yes, well, thank you for listening. My last point is, actually, it's about thinking smart. It's about thinking out of the box. It's about combining different things that at first glance do not seem to belong together. In this case, this was actually a traffic safety campaign we started. And we thought, because people hate traffic lights, what can we do to make traffic lights funny and interesting? And because of the Eurovision Song Contest, we said, well, let's bring in a message for love and respect. And by combining these two things, we merged with one of the most powerful global campaigns in the last years that Vienna has ever had and spread into the world a message of openness and respect and love. And with this picture, I want to leave you. Thanks for listening.
For our conversation about DC's musical history, welcome Natalie Hopkinson, a professor at Howard University and author of Go-Go Live, and Frank Sirius, the leader of the Chuck Brown Band. They are here with Atlantic Deputy Editor Jillian White.
Hello. So I'm so excited that I get to start out my morning here at CityLab. It's one of my favorite conferences, but particularly with this conversation about culture and art and the people who do that and how that shapes the lifeblood of a city. So before we get to that, Natalie showed me a quote from a particular paper in New York that was talking about DC. And this is it. I want to read it so I get it correct. Washington can be an isolating and serious place to live sometimes. Considering the steady influx of tourists, the underlying tension of politics, and the residents who come and go, depending on it's uncommon to meet a Washington native. And it takes a lot for Washingtonians to get excited about the same thing. Calling it a fun-loving city would be a stretch. So it feels a little bit like a gift from the media gods, so I'm gonna take it, and I want you both to respond to it. Natalie, you wanna start?
That is high-level trolling for those of us who live here, and particularly the go-go community, because I can't think of anything more fun-loving than go-go culture.
I mean, it's, like you said, high-level trolling. But for me, someone who's been in go-go music since I was 9 years old, that's all it's been for me. It's fun. You know, for a long time before it became business, it was all fun. From a time where, you know, every corner, you know, had a go-go band. Every school had bands, and you know, all the kids would gather at the go-go. So, for me, it's all been fun since I've been living. I'm fifth generation Washingtonian. You know what I mean? So, to hear that kind of thing is like it's either ignorance or lack of consideration. You know what I mean? For the people that have been here for forever.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not a DC native either. I'm one of these people who came in with the winds. I came in to go to Howard University in 1994, but I listened, I noticed, I watched people, I read books. You know, I could learn that there's a whole world of go-go that's here. And when I was on Saturday, I was at an event at the Georgetown Library where we were talking about this topic, and met a gentleman who was a huge go-go fan, 12th generation Washingtonian on his mother's side, on his father's side, 16th generation Washingtonian on his mother's side.
Wow.
So they exist, they're here, they're having lots of fun, and
we've been here.
Yeah, we've been here, yes.
So now I want to dig into the idea of go-go and how it meets DC and the community and how things are changing in communities and what that means for go-go.
Mm-hmm.
Natalie, you were part of Don't Mute DC, which was a petition that went out after there was a incident that is now pretty infamous in DC where a resident at a nearby condo wanted the music at a Metro PCS on 7th Street in Shaw shut down. They wanted them to not play their music so loud anymore, and the music that they were playing was go-go. Mm-hmm. And this inspired a lot of passionate response and went on for several months. Natalie, I want you to talk us through why people felt so deeply about that situation and kind of your work around it.
Yeah, so it was sort of like, it was so on the nose, you know, that it was this particular corner, which is where U Street begins, historically the segregated part of DC. You know, Black people did not choose to be put there, but segregation sort of determined that. But yet there's all this amazing life there. You know, Langston Hughes wrote about it. He wrote about the songs of 7th Street, you know, how they inspired his poetry. And you had Duke Ellington that played on that strip, and Chuck Brown, and you had the Howard Theater. And so there's like this rich cultural tradition that's been under attack in the last, you know, 20 years really, since gentrification has sort of been picking up. And so it was sort of like one of these last stand things. So I created this petition with Ronald Moten, and it got 80,000 signatures, Don't Mute DC Music and Culture. And it really sort of has, you know, is like there's a fierce defense of the music that was born here, but also just the whole way of life. I mean, you're talking about a city that 20,000 Black Washingtonians have been documented to have been pushed out of DC, you know, in a very short amount of time. So it's about the music, but then it's so much more.
Yeah. It was almost like a call and cry, you know what I mean? It gave the music a shot in the arm during that time because, I mean, like you said, we have so many people that grew up on the music, being born here, and have basically their whole lives built around the go-go, you know what I mean? It's not traditionally the word that most people outside of here can gravitate to or recognize what it means. But the go-go is, just to give a quick history, 1976, around 77, Chuck Brown infused what we call funk, disco, and jazz. And, traditionally, when you had a show or you had a concert or a party, the DJ would spin a song, people would dance, the song would stop, and he'll put another record on, and it gave people a chance to really go sit down. So Chuck Brown started playing top 40 music, and in between songs, he would just play a beat. And the pocket beat would give us a chance to dance while he's switching or while he's transitioning the songs. And so it became go-go music because it kept going and going and going and going. And so, 40 years later, we're still going and going and going. And I've been doing it professionally now for the last 20 years. And so for us, it was a way of life. It was a part of DC culture. You know what I mean? It's the forgotten part almost up until they started the Don't Mute DC campaign. It's been really the forgotten music along with the forgotten people that have been here for, so many generations. And with so many, black folk being pushed out of the city through, financial means or what have you, it's become sort of our calling cry. The go-go music is really our stamp of we're still here. You know what I mean? So it's been a rough ride, but it's a ride worth taking.
Well, I was going to say, so you are from a long lineage of go-go royalty. How did it feel for this moment to bubble up and be centered around basically a criticism of trying to stop and silence go-go music in particular? What did that feel like, having been a fifth generation,
yeah.
Washington, D.C. native?
It's really been a sign of the times. It's like a microcosm and a macrocosm. It's really the small thing that represents the big thing that's going on all around the country, really. You know what I mean? The inner cities, like you said, black people didn't choose to be here. Washington, D.C. historically was one of the places, was the hub for a lot of African Americans to be able to be free during a time when we weren't able to be free in a lot of places. And so, excuse me, when we became Washingtonians, it was nicknamed Chocolate City for a reason. It was predominantly black, and there was a culture of socializing in bars and clubs, and the music became our unifying kind of source of pride. And even to this day, you go somewhere, kids go to college, they hear go-go music, and they're like, what you know about that DC stuff? You know what I mean? And so it becomes a sense of, it's really the icebreaker in a lot of conversations when you come from this area.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add to that, it was, he said that it was a place that people came to be free, and that's quite literally, during the Civil War, the emancipation 9 months before it came to the rest of the country.
Yep.
And so the line, DC is this diamond shape. So if you crossed over from Maryland or Virginia and you crossed over that DC line, you literally were free, and so you had tens of thousands of people who came to former enslaved people who came into DC, and you had institutions like Howard University, where I teach, that sort of have been a beacon, for people seeking freedom, and so it's not a secret that it's not surprising that something like go-go would sort of come out of that, because it's also, as he mentioned, it's a way of life. I mean, it's a whole, I talk about go-go in my book as being a collection of black-owned businesses. And so Don Campbell, who owned the Metro PCS store at the corner of 7th Street and Florida Avenue, he was sort of one of those businesses that people have been, aside from the musicians, you have the people who sell the music, people who promote the music, people who own the clubs, people who promote the clubs, sound engineers, you have affiliated fashion industry that came out of go-go music. So it's a whole economy that sort of has allowed DC in its really most challenging times, when there wasn't a lot of the surpluses in the budgets and there wasn't a lot of economic investment. It really is something that allowed people to survive in DC. So when it's under attack, you're going to hear something about that.
Yeah.
How do you think that the gentrification of DC, the pushing out of some of the black families who have lived here for generations, how do you think that's affecting the culture as it pertains to music, to go-go, to art? How is it changing the culture of DC?
Well, It's a loaded question. When I was coming up, we had a farm system. You know what I mean? We had a feeder system where music was prevalent in schools. Musicians were being bred, so to speak. I went to a school where, we had one of the best bands, Eastern Senior High School, prior to Capitol Hill. We had one of the best marching bands. Eastern in the building? And we had, of course, with Duke Ellington, but all of most of the DC public schools back then had a music program. And it was basically feeding the go-go community. With, so many people being pushed out, the feeder program is sort of stopped. You know what I mean? So it's affected the long-term growth of the music and not really having, like I said, I've been in since I was 9 years old. I aspired to be, like the guys I've watched at block parties and clubs and, that kind of thing. But now, the kids don't really have that interest in playing live music like they had when I was a kid. And so with the gentrification part of it, it's all about budgets. It's all about the interests of the people. And, DC is a transient town. It's a political town on the surface. Mm-hmm. And so, with their kids, with people that come into the city to live, with their kids, they have their own interests. You know what I mean? And so they might not be into what we were into as kids as far as what's already been here, as far as the culture of DC. And so I think it's really on us and a lot of people that come here to really get, want to be acclimated, want to learn, want to learn about our culture so we can start that feeder program again, you know what I mean? So we can continue to have just people want to be into the music.
Yeah. Natalie, when you showed me that quote earlier, one of the first questions I had was, how could it be that people legitimately feel like they have never met anyone who is a DC native? When I go home every night, I know both my neighbors, 90% of my block, are multi-generational households and are folks who have been here for generations. It is wild to me that people could be here for a period of time and feel like they don't know anyone who's a DC native. How do you think these discrepancies between what we know to be the actual culture and history of DC and what people are saying about DC, how does that gap happen?
So it's sort of like, so a lot of neighborhoods have actually become more integrated because of gentrification than ever. And so, it is possible to have somebody you're a New York native, right?
Yep.
So you could be sandwiched by two DC natives. And that's actually happening in a lot of neighborhoods now. But maybe what might be different with you is you might have a conversation with your neighbor. Maybe you hang out on the porch in the front and have, informal conversations. Maybe you say hello to them. That's the traditional culture of DC. It's very Southern. It's a lot of porch, a lot of sidewalk conversations. And so a lot of newcomers aren't acclimated to that. And so they miss out. And so they just miss out. Like they miss out on learning on, the incredible culture that's here. And then it also just sort of speaks to how hyper-segregated DC is and how many cities are. You're sort of, even in the gentrifying areas, you're just sharing air. You're not actually in a community living together. In my neighborhood, you find a lot of people, they might have like a garage that they come in through, and so they're sort of like rushing to get inside. Or you have a lot of high rises where there's maybe there's your pool top, and so they have these whole worlds that don't interact with the street. And then you sort of compound the other segregation, like schools, which Frank mentioned. Schools hyper-segregated, so the kids aren't going to school together. Workplaces hyper-segregated. Restaurants hyper-segregated. Nightlife hyper-segregated. So, it's totally possible for you to be living in DC and have no idea that there's this amazing culture. And you know what? They're just missing out, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you said just sharing the same air, it reminded me of another incident that happened in Shaw where residents started taking their dogs to Howard University and allowing them to use the bathroom on the yard, which is considered a pretty sacred space for Howard University. And it ended up in kind of a big battle in the neighborhood where there was one person in particular who said, well, if they don't like it, they should move the school. Which is a wild thing to say.
Like the audacity, like how do you know what I mean?
The school was established in 1867.
So I'm wondering, when you have that level of kind of divisiveness and lack of understanding, especially in a neighborhood like Shaw and talking about a DC monument like Howard, and neighbors who are new saying, I don't feel any respect or reverence for this thing at all.
Yeah.
How do you bridge that gap?
Well, some of the things that we've been doing, so by the way, I don't live too far from there, and one of my neighbors actually said they saw that person who, he's still walking his dog, you know, not necessarily on campus, but he's still walking the dogs and he's still, you know, doing his thing. But one of the things we've been doing at Howard, we got a small grant from Humanities DC to do some forums called Communicating Across Cultures. We're doing sort of discussions between where we're really specifically trying to get longtime residents and newer residents in the same room. We're ending all of our discussions with go-go, with live go-go, which, you know, is, again, it's a privilege if you try to, you know, and you all are about to be privileged because Frank is about to bless you all with some go-go music too. But, you know, that's part of, you know, like, it has to be intentional. Like, it's not something, like, people won't get on the sidewalk without some sort of intervention, you know, and so, like, there has to be intentional efforts on the part of community organizations, you know, institutions to sort of say, look, we're going to try to do better. We can do better, and we're going to try to do better.
Yeah. Frank, how are you thinking about trying to get go-go music out there to keep it ingrained in DC culture, even as the city is changing?
I'd like to see a curriculum in schools. History classes taught, you know, culture, you know, city history. I think it should be a part of it. You know what I mean? It's a big part of our culture for a long time, and it's. I think it should be in schools. That's one thing I think we should have, and also, I think we should get back to doing block parties and,
yes.
you know what I mean, having a good time, man. That's what it was built around. That's what it's centered around, socializing, having people come together, and music has always been a universal source of, you know, community, and in that, we should have our community listen to our community music. You know, whether you're black, white, brown, purple, it doesn't matter. You know, go-go music is a part of the city's fabric. And if you're here, we should, you know, not force it down your throat, but at least give it a try. You know what I mean? So more community events centered around go-go music. And I can't stress it enough. We need more kids involved in playing live music. You know, with the digital age, we're losing a lot of musicians.
Well, I was going to say, part of the struggle that cities are having across the country, especially in public schools, are the loss of music programs.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about how before that next generation of go-go musicians was coming from schools. There was kind of like a feeder program.
Yeah.
Where are the next generation of go-go musicians coming from now?
I mean, it's scarce, you know, and it's scary to think that DC can have a whole generation miss out on being able to play for people and giving them joy through live music. I don't have an answer for where they're coming from now.
Yeah.
I like to change the narrative, you know, that we have now that there are no feeder programs. I like to start a feeder program, you know what I mean? But it's, you know, budget, money, that kind of thing is really a helpful situation.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing with budget and money. And so, you know, this is what I'm hoping comes out of Don't Mute DC, is that I don't want to hear that excuse. DC had something like $500 million more in revenues last year than they had the year before. You know, like, it's taken off like a rocket. And so I'm really not trying to hear that they don't have money for music in schools. And so this is one of the opportunities I think that there are. So on Wednesday, there's going to be a hearing. Councilman Kenya McDuffie sponsored legislation to make DC the official music of Washington, D.C. And so that's where I think, you know, one of our opportunities are for us to sort of like remind people what the fabric of this city is, what the fabric of this country is, you know, is this African culture that has, you know, survived so much and is sort of thriving in the city. And so that means, I think that DC being the official music, go-go being the official music of DC means that means music is back in the school. That means that it's expanding programs. There's a program called Teach the Beat that a organization called Teaching for Change has been doing for the last few years, where they bring musicians, and some of the musicians that'll be performing tonight have been going in schools, but it's been a very small scale operation, and so we're hoping that gets more resources for that. And mostly, like, I'm hoping that with this legislation, it means that it won't be a secret so much anymore. We will not get these ignorant commentaries from these New York papers saying things about DC.
Yeah. And I don't think like a paper like that or a comment like that would be made about New Orleans and their food and their music. I mean, go to DC is what gumbo is to New Orleans, or what reggae is to Jamaica. You know what I mean? Or hip hop is to New York. It's like this is the mecca of go-go music, and it's been around for over 40 years. And it's crazy that we just getting that. Go-go is the official music of DC. Like, we're just getting that legislation to be able to push that bill through.
To be fair, I don't know any other cities, or maybe other people know. Do cities have official music?
Unofficially, I think.
I'm not sure.
I don't know if it's ever happened, but you know what? Nowhere else has go-go, which is this very unique thing. Yeah. So, I mean, and we need these extraordinary measures to try to protect the culture and cement its place, and to sort of direct resources toward it. So I'm hoping that we get a good hearing.
Well, I think bring New Orleans up in particular is a good example. Do you think there are other cities that have done a good job, even as they've changed, even as new people have come in, of really preserving the culture there and kind of integrating new people into that versus that culture being bulldozed by whatever the new folks want?
Absolutely. You get off the plane in New Orleans, you're going to see trombones and trumpets, and tambourines. You know what I mean? You get off the plane in Jamaica, you hear reggae music. I want it to be like that for DC. When you get off the plane in DC, that's the first thing you see, the Washington Nationals and go-go. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think it's very important.
Well, I think also with New Orleans, with Don't Mute DC, we had an event last month called Don't Mute DC meets Don't Mute NOLA, because they actually picked up the hashtag over there when a musician was arrested on Frenchman Street, unbelievably. And they also have been dealing with issues of gentrification and cultural erasure, even though, music is their brand, and they're still dealing with some of the same Black displacement issues. And so, I think they're doing a better job of, they've done a better job. Like, it's not a secret that jazz and music is a big thing in New Orleans, or gumbo is a big thing in New Orleans. So they've done a better job of integrating into the city's branding. So I think DC can sort of learn from that. Cities like Memphis and Austin, Texas, even Chicago. Yeah, it's not a secret that these are fun-loving places.
Yeah.
So I think that we could learn from those places, but I think they also can learn from us, because DC is sort of I think maybe San Francisco, right? Well, definitely San Francisco is farther along as far as the gentrification path. But we've had a lot of neglect as far as preventing and protecting the native population here. But we still have some resources, and there's still things to protect here. And so what happens in the next year with our city is going to be really important in determining whether there's a place for DC residents and native Washingtonians and their culture.
Yeah. Final lightning round question. If there's one thing that you could get from city government, from neighbors, from community leaders to kind of preserve DC culture, what would it be? Natalie, we're starting with you.
One thing?
One thing. I like a challenge question.
Yeah. I hate to put it all on one thing, but I do think that the legislation on Wednesday is a start. Let's make go-go the official music of DC. And let's not just say it. Let's actually put some resources behind it to support Frank, support musicians going into schools, support research around it. Have the go-go's, have conga players at the airport, and at Union Station. I mean, we can do this. So I think that's one thing.
Frank?
I want to see a go-go band made up of only councilmen and mayors.
I think that is the perfect place to close this out. Natalie, Frank, thanks so much. And you guys are in for a treat now with the Chuck Brown Band.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So, go-go music is very heavily reliant on the crowd, participation, the back and forth communication that we have. So I'm gonna ask y'all a favor. I want everybody in here to listen to the beat first. I call this the grits and the eggs. And with the beat, we can talk, we can communicate. And when I ask y'all to do something, I need y'all to repeat after me, all right? Let me hear you say, hey. Then this is when y'all say it, sing it. Oh, we got a go-go now. Let me hear you say, oh. Repeat after me, sing it. Listen. Well, hey. Hey. Well, hey. Well, hey. Hey, I said I thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'll tell you nothing but the truth, you're looking out of sight. I want you to hold what you got, cause this is your spot. Do what you do because we love you a lot. I'll show you right. Say, I'll show you right. We're gonna take it back to 1979 with the very first Chuck Brown record. Look. Hey, give me the bridge, y'all, give me the bridge now. Well, I feel like busting loose. Give me the bridge, y'all, give me the bridge now. Well, I feel like busting loose now. I say busting loose in the evening. Busting loose make you feel things. Busting loose, yeah. Busting loose when you're on time. Busting loose when you're feeling fine, yeah. Talking about busting loose, yeah. Busting loose when you're on your own. Busting loose to each his own, hey. Talking about busting loose, yeah. Busting loose when you're on your own. Busting loose to each his own, hey. Talking about, give me the bridge, y'all, give me the bridge now. Well, I feel like busting loose. Give me the bridge, y'all, give me the bridge now. Well, I feel like busting loose. This the go-go part right here. Everybody say free, freak-a-deep. I say free, freak-a-deep. I say free, freak-a-deep. I say free, freak-a-deep. Free. Now right here, I want y'all to imagine 20,000 people going crazy. Rocking from side to side like this here. Let's rock now. Get on down. Hey, get on down. Hey, get on up, baby. Ooh, child. Get on. Give me the bridge, y'all. Give me the bridge now. Well, I feel like busting loose. Give me the bridge, y'all. Give me the bridge now. Well, I feel like busting loose. On Congo, y'all give it up for Mighty Mo Hagan. I need y'all to do me a favor. Say, go, Mighty Mo, go, Mighty Mo, go. Say, go, Mighty Mo, go, Mighty Mo, go. Say, go, Mighty Mo, go, Mighty Mo, go. Go, Mighty Mo, go, Mighty Mo, go. Give me the bridge, y'all, give me the bridge now.
busting loose. Give me the bridge, y'all, give me the beat now. Well, I feel like busting loose, busting loose. Thank y'all so much. Thank you, Atlantic. Thank you, CityLab, for having us.
Thank you to the Chuck Brown Band, and thank you all for being here. Today's breakout sessions begin at 11:45, followed by lunch and our concurrent programming. As you make your way around, please be sure to visit the displays and exhibits on the first and second floors and our special Please Enable Cookies bakery on the 12th floor. See you back here at 3 o'clock with the program beginning promptly at 3:30.